I had a nasty breakup with my girlfriend a while back, and although we lived in an apartment together, she stood as the owner of it, so I had no choice but to move out. Thankfully, a good friend of mine allowed me to stay at her place until I could find my own crib. Since I only wanted a rental apartment, my choices were pretty limited. There is a low supply and high demand for rental apartments in my city. After going through several that were too expensive for me, I found a vacant one in the outskirts of the city. It was a large 3-room apartment on the 4th floor, with a view over the woods, and the rent was very low. I immediately applied, and within a couple of hours, I got a reply that I could have it. I deeply regret moving here, and now you may wonder why I haven't left. It's because the contract and the rules forbid me from leaving. The contract is for a year, and honestly, I don't expect to survive until it expires. The same day as I moved in, I found a letter addressed to me from the company that rented it. I opened the letter and I took out the paper, which said, "Rules for living in the apartment complex. Rule number 1. Regardless if you are home or away, your door must always be locked. You do not want to have unwanted guests in your apartment. Should you forget to lock the door after leaving, do not enter your apartment when you return. Call our support for instructions on how to proceed." Rule number 2. It is not forbidden, but we do not recommend leaving the apartment between 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Some entities like to roam the building during the night, and they do not take lightly to intruders. This only implies if you want to leave your apartment and not if you return to it. Rule number 3. If you leave the apartment between that time, always carry a flashlight, a bag of salt, and holy water. The flashlight will repel the shadowy figures that you may see. Should you hear footsteps behind you and no one is there, use the salt to create a salt ring, and do not break it until the footsteps have stopped. The holy water is for any people you may encounter. To make sure it's an actual person, spray it on them. Should they react to it, immediately run back to your apartment and stay there until 5 a.m. If they do not react, it's safe to proceed. Rule number 4. The basement should never be visited under any circumstances between 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. If you should ignore this rule, then there is a high risk that you may never leave it. Rule number 5. If you are in the basement at any given time, with exception to rule number 4, and you hear growls behind you, ignore them and calmly walk to the exit and do not run, because the thing that makes the sound will catch you if you do. Rule number 6. On Mondays and Thursdays, your doorbell will ring at exactly 3 a.m. Approach the door as silently as you can and look through the peephole. There will be an old man with a fancy hat outside. Invite him in and politely ask him if he wants food. It doesn't matter what food you give him. After he has finished the food, he will thank you for your kindness and leave the apartment. Do not refuse him, because if you do, then you die. Rule number 7. Should objects in your apartment move between locations, pour the liquid we have provided you with on them and it'll stop. The liquid is located underneath the sink in the kitchen. No harm will be done to you if you fail to do this, but there is a risk that some objects will never be seen again. Rule number 8. Do not stare into the mirror for longer than 5 minutes at a time. Should you forget about this rule, your own reflection will remain and slowly make its way out of it. If this happens, smash the mirror before it can get out. Rule number 9. Every apartment has an intercom with the name of those who lives here and the number of their apartment. If you wish to visit any tenants, dial them and ask for their permission to visit. Should the doorbell ring and a tenant asks to come in, do not answer them and remain silent. It's not a tenant, as they would never come visit you before calling first. Rule number 10. If you receive mail that is not addressed by the company emblem, Do not touch it with your hands. Use a glove or something else to pick it up and immediately burn it. Should you pick it up, the mailman will visit you the next day, and trust us, you do not want to meet him. Rule number 11. If the light in your apartment turns off between 9:15 and 9:20 p.m., find a place to hide until they have been turned on again. And do not worry, the creature won't find you as long as you are hiding. Rule number 12. Any visitor, meaning visitors outside tenants, must also follow the rules. If they break them, then both you and they will suffer the consequences. Rule number 13. Do not try and leave or move out until your contract expires. If you try and do this, then no matter where you go or who you visit, you will always return to your apartment. I read through the rules repeatedly. Luckily for me, I've read about rules such as this on Reddit and I know the seriousness of breaking them. However, it doesn't mean that they didn't scare the living hell out of me. To calm myself down, I made a cup of coffee and I went to watch TV. A few moments later, I heard the doorbell ring, which made me jump in and spill my coffee, but somehow I managed to stay quiet. "Hello?" a female voice said, but I didn't answer and I sat quietly on the sofa, shaking with fear. "Is anyone home?" the voice continued, not much louder and menacing, but I remained quiet. "I know you're home. Let me in," it said now in a demonic voice, and it started to bang on the door with each bang, having enough force to knock the door down, but it held. This continued for 10 minutes until it stopped. After a couple of more minutes, I got the courage to go to the door and look out the peephole, and nothing was there. I sighed and went back to the sofa. I looked at the clock and it said 9:14 p.m. Remembering the rule, I went to my wardrobe as a precaution to have a chance to hide, since my encounter with 9 had shaken me to the core. As it turned to 9:15, the lights went out and I entered it and covered my mouth. I did not see what entered my apartment, but it was big based on the heavy footsteps it made. I could hear it sniffing around and it took every amount of my willpower to stay quiet. It then left and the lights were turned on again. I carefully exited the wardrobe and sighed as the creature had vanished. After that event, I could not go to sleep, so I decided to watch TV, but somehow fell asleep and woke up to the sound of my doorbell ringing. I looked at my phone and it said 3 a.m. This made me wide awake and I approached the door with trembling steps and I looked through the peephole. My entire body froze as I saw the old man with the fancy hat. I took a few seconds to collect myself and I opened the door. I would have expected a ghastly looking figure, but he looked like a normal person. He appeared to be in his mid-70s with pale complexion, messy gray hair, dark colored eyes, and wore a nice black tuxedo with a purple tie. However, I knew this wasn't an ordinary person, because every cell in my body screamed danger. The old man looked me up and down and said in a friendly voice, "May I come in?" "Of course, sir," I replied as friendly as I could. The man thanked me and entered the apartment. He took off his hat and put it on the shelf and went to the dinner table and sat down. As I closed the door and locked it, I said to the man, "Can I offer you some food?" And he replied, "Yes, I would like that." I nervously went to the kitchen to put together a dish, and while I did, the man stared at me without blinking. It sent shivers down my spine. I served him some chicken with rice and looked nervously at him as he ate my meal. After he was finished, he stood up and walked towards me and said, "Thank you for the meal and your kindness," before grabbing his hat and walking through the door. He literally passed right through the door. After he had left, I started hyperventilating and it took several minutes for me to calm down. I thought in the morning after work, I'll go shopping for protective material against supernatural stuff. Not long after that, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, and I awoke to my alarm clock. The following couple of days, nothing paranormal happened to me, and I did not leave my apartment during the evening and night, but I bought several protective charms during my lunch break. However, the next day when I came home, I saw a letter lying on the doormat and I bent down to grab it. But before I could do so, I remembered rule number 10. If you receive mail that is not addressed by the company emblem, do not touch it with your hands. Use a glove or something else to pick it up, and immediately burn it. Should you pick it up, the mailman will visit you the next day, and trust us, you do not want to meet him. I put on a glove and I picked it up, and I'm glad that I did, because it did not have the rental company's logo on it. I went and grabbed a lighter and set it on fire, and when I did, it released a horrifying scream that made me drop it, and I looked down in horror as blue flames consumed it. As I prepared my dinner, I couldn't find the frying pan in the kitchen locker. I remembered rule number 7. Should objects in your apartment move between locations, pour the liquid that we have provided you with on them and it'll stop. The liquid is located underneath the sink in the kitchen. No harm will be done to you if you fail to do this, but there is a risk that some objects will never be seen again. I took the bottle containing the liquid underneath the sink and I searched for it. I found it in the bedroom on the bed, and I poured the liquid on it, but nothing happened to my surprise. After making dinner and browsing Reddit and YouTube, I decided to take a shower before heading to bed. As I stood in the shower, the lights went out, causing me to freeze before snapping out of it and immediately turn the shower off. Rule number 11. If the light in your apartment turns off between 9:15 p.m. to 9:20 p.m., find a place to hide until they've been turned on again. Do not worry, the creature won't find you as long as you are hiding. I didn't dare to move, and I thanked myself for remembering to put up the shower drape. I heard the creature walking around and sniffing the apartment. It eventually left, but I waited a couple more minutes before turning the shower on again, and luckily nothing happened to me. As I stepped out of the shower, I froze in fear and cursed at myself for my stupidity, as I remembered I did not lock the door after entering and finding the letter. I rushed butt naked out of the bathroom to the door, and locked it and prayed nothing had entered. I quickly went to put an amulet that I bought on, and as I did, it started to burn on my chest. Crap, I thought as my fight or flight mode had activated. I rushed to grab my waist bag, yes I have one, and put my phone, a flashlight, a bag of salt, and a bottle of holy water in it, and grabbed the keys as I left the apartment and made sure to lock it. I looked at the phone and it said 11 p.m. How is this possible, I thought. There is no way in hell that it has been nearly 2 hours since I had stepped out of the shower. Rule number 3. If you leave the apartment between that time, always carry a flashlight, a bag of salt, and holy water. The flashlight will repel the shadowy figures you may see. Should you hear footsteps behind you, and no one is there, use the salt to create a salt ring, and do not break it until the footsteps have stopped. The holy water is for any people that you may encounter. To make sure they're real, spray it on them. Should they react to it, immediately run back to your apartment and stay there until 5 a.m. If they do not react, it's safe to proceed. I walked through the hallway, yes, butt naked, and every hair on my body stood up and I felt uneasy. I saw 3 shadowy figures, but I used the flashlight on them, and as the rule had said, they vanished. When I entered the staircase, I heard footsteps behind me. I cursed and took the bag of salt and I poured a ring around myself. I don't know how long I stood there, but I kept my eyes shut as I heard laughter and screaming around me. Apparently they left that out from the rule. It eventually stopped, so I broke the ring and went on my way, and luckily I saw no people. After leaving the apartment complex, I ran to the nearest 7-Eleven store, which was around 15 minutes away on foot. When I arrived at the 7-Eleven butt naked, the staff was in simple words surprised and horrified, but I had managed to convince them to let me in by saying that I was robbed. They gave me some clothes and allowed me to use the staff room as they called the police. After calming down, I decided to call the company's support and inform them what had happened. The conversation went like this. "This is redacted support. What can I help you with?" A female voice said. "Hey, this is John from apartment XX. I have a major problem that I need assistance." "You broke Rule 1, didn't you?" the woman said, slightly annoyed. "John, we'll send a team to your apartment. It'll take us 2 days to fix things. Until then, you will be provided with a guest room at one of our other apartment complexes. That place has a list of rules that are slightly different from the ones that you have. Follow them and you'll be fine. Since this is a first-time offense, you will not receive any punishment. We'll send a car to pick you up." "Wait, what about—" But she had already hung up on me. Well, isn't this great, I thought, when one of the staff had entered and told them the cops are there. I told them what I had told the staff, and I saw that they didn't believe me, but they just dismissed me as being a weirdo. After they had left, I thanked the 7-Eleven staff for helping me, and I went out where a black sedan had waited for me. An hour later, I arrived at a guest apartment. It was a 2-room apartment with a kitchen and bathroom. On the bed were a box with my belongings and a letter. I went and picked up the letter, which said, "Rules for living in the guest room apartment. Rule 1. Do not leave the guest room under any circumstances until you receive a call from the company support. Rule 2. Do not look in the mirror in the bathroom at any point. It will take it as an invite. You will feel very tempted to look in it, so our advice is to use a blindfold whenever you have to use the bathroom. Rule 3. Should you look in the mirror, then pray the entity takes pity on you. Rule 4. Always place a plate of food underneath the bed before going to sleep. Should you forget about this, then there is a risk that you will be the meal. The food is stored underneath the sink. Rule 5. If an old lady by the name of Anna knocks on your door at any point and asks you to help her, ignore her and do not approach the door. She will disappear after 5 minutes. Should you not do so, then you will be dead in the morning. Rule number 6. If you hear 3 taps on the window, ignore it as it wants your attention. If you hear 2 taps followed by 3 quick taps, find a place to hide until it is stopped. If you hear a crash while in hiding, it had managed to enter your apartment. Remain quiet as it can only find you if you make a noise. After 3 minutes, it will disappear. Rule 7. If you hear laughter from the ceiling, do not look up. Ignore it and it will eventually stop. My heart sank after reading the rules. I went from one hellish place to an even more hellish place. I went through my stuff and thankfully all my protective gear was there. I thought about calling the police but dreaded what could happen to them. I sighed and thought that I will just not break the rules. I will survive. After my little pep talk, I placed out various protective gear, and after I was finished, I sat down on the couch to watch some TV before dozing off. I was jolted awake to both my amulets burning like the sun on my chest, and to the sound of 3 taps on the window, and luckily, I had put the drapes over them. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would escape my body, but overcoming the burning pain of the amulet, I managed to remain quiet. It went on for 10 minutes before I heard 2 taps, followed by 3 quick taps. Holy crap, I thought, and quickly but quietly made my way to the bedroom and I hid in the wardrobe. A few seconds later, the window broke, and I heard the most horrifying growl that nearly made me scream, but I managed to cover my mouth. I stood there quietly as the creature roamed the apartment. It eventually entered the bedroom and I saw it through a crack in the door. It looked like a dog, except it had gray scales and limbs with claws that resembled talons, and its face was terrifying, burning red eyes with a wide mouth full of fangs. It searched through the bedroom before disappearing, and as it did, the amulet stopped burning and I exited the wardrobe. When I went back to the living room, the window was fixed and there was no sign that the creature had ever been there. I looked at my watch and it said 11:15 p.m. Great, only 28 more hours in this place. I went back to the couch and that was when I heard it. A demonic laughter coming from above me, at the same time as a loud knock on the door. "Hey, this is Anna, your neighbor. Could you help me with my groceries?" The woman, or whatever the heck that thing was, said in a surprisingly warm tone. The laughter became louder as the thing at the door said that, and my amulet burned so much that I had to take it off. I looked down and saw that it had left a burn mark on my chest. I started to quietly sob and I silently muttered, "Why the heck did I have to endure all this stuff? I just wanted it to end." 5 minutes later, the knocking and the laughter stopped. As if my body had moved on its own, I quickly went and picked up the food underneath the sink and put it on a plate and placed it underneath the bed. I then fell on top of the bed and the next I knew, I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. "This is John," I stammered. "This is Teresa from the support. We're all finished with your apartment and some of our workers will come and pick you up." I sighed in relief and laughed maniacally after she had hung up, as I realized I had slept for nearly 28 hours. 2 hours later, I sat in the car on my way back to my apartment. I noticed that I had put my amulet in my pocket, and the moment that I touched the amulet, it burned my fingers. As it burned, my heart sank and I thought this was the end of the line for me. I looked at the driver, which appeared to be human, but the amulet and instinct said that he was not. If this is the end, then I might as well put everything on the line, because what else do I have to lose? I took a few moments to gather up my courage and I asked, "Are you from the company or are you something else?" But got no response. "I asked you a question," I said in an angrier tone. He then turned around and almost gave me a heart attack. He had pale skin with hollow eyes and no other facial features, and he waved his hand, causing me to lose consciousness. Next thing I knew, I woke up in my apartment and felt more rested than I've ever been. I got up and went to make coffee to make sense of what had happened since the guest apartment. It was then that I found a letter at the door. Remembering the rule, I looked at it and the letter had the company logo on it. This is what it said. "John, you've lasted longer than any other guest before, and you've proven yourself capable of surviving the horrors of this place. We are very impressed with you and want to offer you a position within our company. If you join us, John, we will nullify your contract and you will be free to live your life, but you will serve us until you die. Should you not accept our offer, then good luck at surviving until your contract with us expires. We want your answer as quickly as possible. Don't forget, the rules still apply. The owner." What in the everlasting hell, I thought, and I dropped my coffee. I read the letter repeatedly and it sent chills down my spine every time that I read it. Thousands of thoughts rushed through my mind and I had to sit down. I can't do this anymore. And so I went and grabbed my cell phone and it said 7 p.m. I called my friend who I stayed with before moving and told her that I'm in desperate need of help. She arrived 30 minutes later to my place and I nearly crushed her in a hug. After talking for a few minutes, I showed her the rules. If you've forgotten about them, well, here they are. She looked at me like I was going to burst out saying, "It's a prank," but my serious expression told her that I was dead serious. I then showed her the letter that I received and she looked at me questioning and said, "Why did you give me an empty paper?" This sent off alarm bells in my head as I could perfectly read what it said. Now, you may wonder why I did something like this, bringing in a visitor. Because I wanted to see if I was still sane or if I had completely lost it. "You know what, John? This was a mistake," she replied, and she went to grab her coat when the doorbell rang. I sprinted towards her and said in a whisper, "Do not answer it." "Hello, may I come in?" A male voice said, "What's the matter with you?" She replied silently, only for her body to stiffen as it said, "You must let me in. Open the door." In that same demonic voice that made my blood freeze. I dragged her back to the couch and we sat in silence as the demon or whatever it was banged and yelled for us to let it in. After it had stopped, she looked at me in fear and said, "Is this for real? Have you been living like this all the time?" I nodded in response and told her that you must follow the rules. I then told her about everything that had happened to me since I had moved in, including the letter that only I could read. "You gotta do something, John. Call the cops, the FBI, the freaking army," she said after I finished my story. You don't think I've thought about that, but what would I say? Hey, I live in a supernatural apartment where some deeply disturbing stuff goes on, and I have to follow a list of rules that sets off supernatural calamities. They would send me to a mental asylum. Before we could continue our conversation, the lights went out and my amulet began to burn again. "Come on," I said, and I grabbed her and rushed into the bathroom and put the drape up around the bathtub. The creature arrived and I had to hold her mouth to prevent her from screaming. We stood dead silent as the creature sniffed around. I had counted how long it's been since the lights went out and it had been more than 5 minutes. Crap, I thought, now terrified. This isn't supposed to happen. Just as I heard a deep growl coming from inside the bathroom. However, as the creature approached us, the lights went on and the movement stopped, but the amulet was still burning. It was then that I realized my mistake. I tore down the drape, grabbed her hand, and we made a run to the door. I had completely forgotten that I have a little mirror in the shower bar facing the direction that I stood in. As we made our way to the door, I looked back and saw a twisted version of myself smiling at us. I unlocked the door and managed to shut it, as the twisted version of me ran into it. "What on the earth was that?" she asked, terrified, as we ran through the hallways. "Something messed up," I replied. I heard a demonic laughter behind us as the evil me had managed to leave the apartment, and it ran after us. We approached the stairwell, only to have the creature from before stand in front of it. "I'm sorry," I said to her, "for getting you involved. While I make a run for it, I will lead them away from you and give you the chance to get away." Not listening for a reply, I took off. My idea worked as they went off after me. As I ran from evil me and a large dog-bear-like creature with gray fur, burning eyes and a twisted face, an idea came into my head. I ran to another staircase and then down to the basement with them following me. I had managed to open the door to the basement fully. The two creatures rushed into it, and as they did, I pulled the door shut. I could hear a terrifying growl from within as they banged on the door trying to escape before going silent. I sat down at the door, not realizing how out of breath I was. After resting for a few minutes, I went back to my apartment, and on my way there, the amulet did not burn. I sat down on the couch when my phone rang. With shaking hands, I looked at it, and the display said unknown number. I answered it and heard a very deep and dark voice say, "Well done, John. You've exceeded my expectations. That move by using the rules against themselves was very clever. The clock is ticking and I'm growing impatient. Will you take my offer or not?" "I'll take the offer," I replied to whatever the thing was on the phone, and immediately its tone changed from a deep and menacing to a calm and polite one. "Excellent. We will send you a car within the hour, and once you arrive, you will be given your first task." The thing replied and hung up. Immediately afterwards, I felt a sense of relief. It was like whatever evil that was present had disappeared. However, what I didn't know was that this feeling would be replaced with a much more terrifying one. An hour later, I heard a knock on the door. I walked to it carefully and opened it, and a 7-foot-tall man with pale skin and no hair or facial features, except a pair of hollow eyes with a blue uniform that said, "The Mailman," stood there. I stared at the being in horror and took a few steps back. Despite not having a mouth, it spoke to me in a very dark voice and distorted tone. "Your car is here," and gestured me to follow him. I complied because my fear of what would happen if I didn't outweighed my rational thinking. I grabbed my coat and followed the demonic mailman through the hallway with trembling steps and expected something would jump me. However, nothing happened and the next couple of hours were blurry because the moment I sat down in the car, I passed out. I woke up in a white room with no doors or windows and only a red office chair with a man sitting in it. "You're awake, that's good," the man said and turned the chair around. I expected another horror figure to sit in it, but to my surprise, the being looked like an ordinary human. He appeared to be in his mid-60s with gray hair, dark brown eyes, and a light complexion. He was tall, much taller than me, and wore a red tuxedo. I felt dread filling my body when he flicked his hand, and he pulled the amulet from me. "Oh, you won't be needing this anymore," and he crushed it between his hand. "My name is Apollon, and I'm the owner of this company," as he raised his hand and brought me kneeling in front of him. I was terrified and I couldn't stop shaking. I remembered that I've heard that name sometime before, but I couldn't make the connection. He looked at me and laughed. "No need to be afraid, John. I won't harm you unless you give me a reason to do so," and he gestured for me to stand up. "You took my offer. Good. But to be sure that you are sincere with your decision and not trying to use it to save yourself, I will give you a task. If you fulfill it, then I know you are a part of us. However, if you do not, then I will make you experience things that are beyond anything you've experienced at the apartment." Dang, I thought. He saw right through me. "What is it that you want me to do?" I asked, still terrified. He smiled at me and waved his hand, and I found myself back at the apartment with a note that said, "I want you to give me 3 souls you are choosing that you have a personal tie to." As I read it, I heard a knock on the door, and as I opened it, the demonic mailman entered. I felt tears running down my face and I wanted to scream. I shook with fear and anger as I not only realized what I had to do, but also who I dealt with. "Abaddon," I said loudly, which caused the mailman to form a smile on his face using his fingers. It's been about a month since I took the job offer and provided 3 souls to the demon, Abaddon. I won't disclose who I choose because I'm deeply ashamed of my actions, but I'm free from the rules. I'm allowed to spend my time how I see fit. However, when Abaddon reaches out to me, I must answer. I'm terrified all the time, and I've started drinking and I barely sleep. I've done some horrible things. I tried one time to refuse, and that made me experience horror that made everything I had felt in the apartment look like a children's movie. I traded myself from something horrifying to something far more horrifying. The worst part is that, beneath the constant fear, I'm beginning to enjoy my new job. Now my job is to write and enforce supernatural rules for a rental company, and my current target is a new apartment building where my ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend will move into. I've come up with a really good set of rules, probably some that you are really familiar with.